Welcome to the Week 4 interactive video for continued learning, cultural responsiveness and humility. This video will provide you with an opportunity to deconstruct scenarios and apply your knowledge regarding cultural humility. Before we dive into the scenarios, let's review some important concepts. By nature and from childhood, we all use the mental process of organizing and categorizing new information based on previous knowledge. That kind of mental structure is called a schema. A schema can include perceived social roles or stereotypes, but one basic example is a schema of what your mind considers to be a phone. While some young people only know phones that look like sleek rectangles, older generations relate to a concept of a phone that includes buttons, dials, receivers, and cords. Although developing schemas is a natural process, letting that process go unquestioned leads to the development of biases, which are inclinations or prejudices for or against someone or something. We often deal with two kinds of biases. Explicit bias, which refers to the attitudes and beliefs held about, for instance, a person, group, or customs on a conscious level, and implicit bias. Implicit bias is the subconscious favoring of people and the customs from one's own in-group or dominant group, or it can take the form of social stereotypes about people from outside one's own group. Implicit bias is influenced by perspectives, typically related to schemas developed during childhood and influenced by a lifetime of perspectives about people, environments, and cultures. Implicit bias can affect relationships between providers and victims and undermine the efficacy of services. To combat the issue, many professions have committed to valuing cultural responsiveness, which requires individuals to work toward cultural competency. Cultural competence can be depicted as a stage on a spectrum. It is based on learning about different cultures in order to honor them and understand how to interact with them. Let's hear more on the concept of cultural competency from Lana Kim, Program Director and Associate Professor in the Department of Counseling, Therapy, and School Psychology at Lewis and Clark College.
In the family therapy field, and I think in a variety of disciplines, there's this concept called cultural competency that was introduced. And it's sort of this idea that, what we really need is to respect multiple ways of doing things, multiple ways of being, and that we need to become versed in how to work with people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, so on and so forth. And I think one thing that I have grown increasingly frustrated by as a clinician and as an educator is the idea that cultural competence is a misnomer in a lot of ways, and it really leads us to engage with one another in very categorical ways that I question whether it really serves us. What I mean by that is, what does that even mean to be culturally competent? How do you translate that?
The idea of cultural humility challenges this entire continuum and the often focused on concept of cultural competency. Cultural competency is a goal, and cultural humility is a mindset. Whereas competency really deals with perceived knowledge, humility relates to consciousness, acknowledging that one's own knowledge is limited as to what truly is another's culture, right? We cannot understand fully another's perspective. So cultural humility deals with a willingness to suspend what one knows or thinks they know about a person based on generalizations about the person's culture. Let's hear from Lana Kim once again.
Cultural competency is sort of more about the cognitive piece. Cultural humility is really about a process. It's not a destination. It's not saying, I'm culturally humble, I'm culturally responsive. No, it's about adopting an attitude that helps us lean into seeking to know one another from a real, genuine place of curiosity.
Dr. Saida Pepra, the founder and executive director of Diversity Uplifts, says that acting with cultural humility requires a dismantling of implicit bias. Cultural humility requires one to identify their biases and suspend what one thinks they know in order to normalize a client's experiences and lean into their perspective. Cultural humility starts with introspection to make way for authentic curiosity. You contain multitudes. Consider all of the aspects that contribute to your own identity, your own cultural script, your upbringing, and your perspective. What ingredients combine to make your own identity pie? Are you a music lover? A connoisseur of coffee? Are you a child or a parent? An immigrant? A professional? Which of those slices of identity pie do you really share with the world? Dr. Pepra noted that cultural humility requires individuals providing services to know and recognize for themselves that they have their own norms and views, which are not quote unquote right. They're just different. Culture is not just about what is on the surface, what we share with one another. It is about the whole iceberg. What values and belief systems does a person subscribe to? What ideas does one hold as truths? The more we can be aware of our own cultural iceberg, the more we can be responsive to the cultural perspectives of another. Although we can never know another's perspective, cultural humility demands a perpetual state of listening, learning, and adjusting to others in order to be as congruent as possible. Tervalon and Murray Garcia wrote about the guiding features of cultural humility, but applying those features requires mindfulness. Cultural humility makes you trustworthy to those around you, and trust is a foundation for effective services. In the interest of cultivating trust, guidelines around practicing cultural humility include acknowledge personal biases, listen with empathy rather than assuming, ask open-ended questions, be curious, identify what is beneath the iceberg, ask questions to understand that context, ask questions to understand beliefs, and ask questions to understand values and priorities. We may not be responsible for the world that created our minds, but we can take responsibility for the mind with which we create our world. As you prepare to review a few scenarios to apply your knowledge about cultural competency, remember this quote. Let's put your knowledge to the test. Navigate the following scenarios and assess them by answering the set of questions following each hypothetical. Scenario 1. 3 farm workers visit a community advocacy center for guidance because the farm supervisor has been stalking members of the workers' families. The advocate in charge of the first meeting hands them intake assessment documents in English and Spanish, and after reading the first intake document submitted by one member of the group, calls a trustworthy law enforcement agent to come to the office to take all of their statements for a report. Scenario 2. An advocate has been asked to help a client fill out a victim's compensation request form and an application for physical therapy at a low-income clinic for a victim who was injured during a domestic violence incident. The forms require a great deal of personally identifying information and documentation, and while the advocate is reviewing the victim's file, they notice that there is a mix of some paperwork referring to the victim as Joseph and some paperwork referring to the client as Josephine. Scenario 3. An advocate with a great deal of experience sits down with a victim of domestic violence for the first time, It learns that the victim's spouse demonstrated a long-standing pattern of abuse. The advocate says, "I have seen cases like this before. I can give you information about filing for divorce. You can move out, and you can get a protective order if you want this to end well." Scenario 4. After a brief intake assessment conducted by a legal assistant, a male attorney walks into a waiting room and introduces himself to a sexual assault survivor for the first consultation about a victim's rights issue. Scenario 5. A victim walks into an office and requests an unplanned meeting with a system-based advocate, Cam, and a community-based advocate, Jade. The receptionist tells Cam that the victim is from Bolivia and does not speak English, then offers to reschedule. Cam insists that the meeting should go forward because Jade's parents are from Mexico, so she can interpret. Thank you for continuing to learn with us about cultural responsiveness and humility.